Hello friends, welcome to a new React tutorial. In this project, we are going to create a Pokemon puzzle game. So this game looks like this, wherein there are Pokemon hidden behind cards and we need to unflip those one by one and try to match them. As you match them, there is a progress bar that goes on. If the cards are not matched, they flip back again. And if they match with each other, they stay open. The goal is to solve this puzzle by uncovering all the Pokemons in as less moves as possible. Okay? So let me just go through the game. And when the game is won, you see some confetti for solving the puzzle. Okay? And the player can also reset the game by clicking on the button. This video is sponsored by AIvideo.to. AI Video is an AI tool to create short videos for YouTube, TikTok and Instagram by just entering a topic. All you need to do is just enter whatever topic of your video and click the create button and sit back while your video is created in less than 1 minute. After your video is created, you can check out all the media that is generated and you can go check out AIvideo.to. There is a coupon code in the description with which you get 30% off on all pricing plans on AIvideo.to. So do check them out, and now let's begin our tutorial. So let's begin by creating a new React project with White. I'm naming my project Pokemon Puzzle. You can name whatever you like. The project is created, so let's cd into the folder and let's install the dependencies. The dependencies have been installed, so let's open our code editor and go to the app.js file in source folder. Let's also start our development server with yarn dev and then copy the link and paste it in the browser. So here is our React app scaffolded. Okay, so now let's go back to our app.js file and remove everything else, and we'll only leave a div behind. Save. Right. Let's give our game a title. We'll call it Pokemon Puzzle Game. Now for this tutorial, we are going to use a CSS library called Nest CSS. Nest CSS gives us retro 8-bit games like design. So let's grab this from its readme. We go down here and copy the CDN, and back in our editor we go to index.html and in the head section below the title paste it like this. Back to our editor, let's give our title a class name called Nest Text, which comes from the library, and title. Okay. After we have done this, let's define a bunch of state variables. Alright. So the first state variable will be called Pokemons. This state variable will hold all the initial Pokemons that will be shown on the screen, which means a collection of Pokemon cards with each Pokemon having 2 copies. So initially it will be an empty array. Now let's copy and paste this a bunch of times. The second variable will be called flipped cards. This variable will hold the current cards that have been flipped by the player. Also an array. Next is called matched pairs, to hold all the successfully matched pairs of Pokemons by the user. Also an empty array. Next we'll define a state variable called moves, which will be a counter for the number of moves the player has made, because the objective of the game is for the player is to solve the puzzle in as less moves as possible. So move starts out as 0. And finally, the last state variable will be game1, which will track whether or not the puzzle is solved already and the player has won the game. Initially, it's set to false. Now, when the game begins, we need to first create an array of Pokemon data, which we can show on the screen. Every time the game begins, this needs to be randomized so that the Pokemon positions are at different places each time to confuse the player. That's why it can be called the puzzle, right? So to do this, we define a use effect hook. This is how you import use effect and use state in React. Once you define the use effect hook, we'll leave the dependency array as empty to make sure that this only runs the first time the app is loaded or the game is loaded. Inside of this hook, we'll create a variable called shuffled Pokemons, right? Now to create this will be an array and we'll unpack some initial data from a variable called initial Pokemons, right? Now we haven't yet defined, just hold on a minute, where after which I'll create this variable. For now, I want you to understand that each Pokemon needs to have 2 copies of itself for the player to match. So we'll do this 2 times, okay? So this creates 2 copies. Now we need to randomize this. So we'll sort this array, right? We'll sort this array based on a random value. So we'll call math.random minus 0.5, okay? So this sorts this array randomly. After that, we'll also map over this final array, get each Pokemon, and for each Pokemon, we'll return an object, which will be the Pokemon object itself, and we'll create a random ID each time, okay? So math.random. So now we have created a random array, a collection of Pokemon, 2 copies of each Pokemon, right? So now we need to set our initial state with this data called shuffle Pokemons, right? Now that we have created an initial state for Pokemon data, we need to also allow the player to reset the game. So let's create a button, give it a class name called NESBTN, and also isError to make it red. And this button will say restart game, okay? And this button will have an on-click handler which will call the reset game function. Now we need to define this reset game function, so let's do it here using arrow function syntax like this. And the goal of the reset game is to reset all the state variables first. So we'll set flipped cards to an empty array. We'll set matched pairs to also an empty array. We'll set the moves count to 0, right? We'll set the game 1 to false. And after we have reset all the state variables, we need to create a new collection of Pokemons. So we'll just copy this code from our use effect and we'll paste it here, right? Like this. So now we have allowed the player to reset the game and we have an initial condition for the game to begin. Now where does this initial Pokemons come from? So let's create that. We'll create a file called data.js. Inside it, let's define initial Pokemons as an array and also export default this from here, right? Now, for the sake of this project, we are not going to use any external API to get the Pokemon data. So I'm just going to paste some initial Pokemon data which I have collected. You can copy it from the link in the description which has all the source code. You can go and find this file data.js on GitHub and copy and paste this in your own project. Okay, so just to give you an overview, each Pokemon is an object in this array. It has an ID, a name, and the image of the Pokemon. That's it. There are total 6 Pokemon for this game. If you want, you can add more Pokemons here as much as you like and the ones you like. Okay, so now back in app.jsx, we need to import the initial Pokemons variable and this is how you do that. Okay, so now we have initial data coming in. The next thing to do is, okay, first of all, let's display an icon at the beginning of the game. So we'll display an image of Ash. Okay, so we'll do class name Ness Ash. Now this icon comes from the Ness CSS library. You can refer to the documentation to learn more. When we save this, we go back and here is Ash and our title and our reset game button, right? And this looks like an retro old game like style. So yeah, that's what we are going for. Now we need to create a board of Pokemon that we can show on the screen. The board will be a collection of cards. So let's create a card component first. We'll create a components folder. Inside of that, we'll create a card.jsx file, right? To create the card component. Let's define it here using arrow function syntax and export default the card component from this file. Now this card component will receive a few props. Okay, so the props that it receives are, the first is the Pokemon that needs to be displayed. The second is the isFlipped state, and finally an onClick callback. Okay, now this card returns some markup. First of all, a div. Let's give it a class name called card. Now we need to make some conditional classes as well. So let's replace the quotes with ticks. And now we'll check for a condition called isFlipped, which means if the card is flipped or not. If the card is not flipped, we won't do anything. If the card is flipped, then we'll give it a class of flipped. Okay, close this div. And on this div, we'll create an onClick handler. And we'll just pass the onClick callback that we receive in the props as it is. Okay. Now inside of this div, we'll check whether if isFlipped is true or not. Okay. Now if isFlipped is true, which means the player has flipped the card. So we need to show the image of the Pokemon. So we'll do image source and the current Pokemon dot image. The alt, we can set it to Pokemon dot name and close this. We can give this image a class name of card image like this. Now, if the card is not flipped, we need to show an empty state. So we'll just show a Pokeball icon. We'll create a div with the class name of Ness or maybe card back, right? And inside of this, we'll let's close this div. Inside of this, we'll create an icon with the class name Ness and Pokeball. This also comes from the Ness CSS library. Close this, and now we should have Pokeballs, right? When the cards are unflipped. Now this card component imports a CSS file called card.css to style it. Let's create this file right now on the same level. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to focus on CSS. We are just going to focus on the React logic part. I'll just go over some important CSS that applies to some core elements. So I'm going to just paste this. You can copy this from the GitHub link in the description. So there are some styles like cards and card.flipped. If the card is flipped, give it a different background color. If the card image is shown, give it some dimensions. If the card back is shown, then show some, add something if you want to show some text, okay? And when the card is flipped, you add some transformation to it if you want, okay? Now let's go back. The card is created. Now we need to create a board which will be a collection of cards, okay? So let's create a board component, board.jsx, and we'll create a board component inside of this, again using arrow function syntax. And let's export default board, right? And again, board receives a bunch of props. So the first prop is the Pokemon's array, then a flipped cards array, and then a matched pairs, and finally a handle card click callback like this. Okay, now inside of this we'll return some markup, and we create a div with the class name of board, and nest container is rounded and is dark. Let's close the div, save. Now inside of this we'll map over all the Pokemons in the array that we receive as props, right? So map get each Pokemon, right? Now inside of this we just need to render the card that we created earlier. So we'll import the card component like this, and now pass some props to it. So first of all the current Pokemon, and then an isFlipped state. Now to create this isFlipped state, this will be based on a bunch of conditions. So first of all we'll check if the current Pokemon is in the flipped cards array or not. So we'll do flipped cards dot includes and the current Pokemon dot ID. Okay, or we'll check if the current card has already been matched with some other card. So we'll check match pairs dot includes the current Pokemon dot ID. Save. And finally we'll pass an on click prop, which will be the handle card click callback. And let's close the card component like this. Now we also need to give this card component a key because it's being mapped over. So we'll pass the Pokemon.id as a key. Okay. Now save this and let's go back to our screen. We don't see anything because we haven't included the board in the app.jsx component yet. But before we do that, this component needs to import a CSS file for its styles. We'll call it board.css. Spelling is wrong, B-O-A-R-D, board CSS. And we create a file here. And I'll just paste some styles here. You can type this or copy it from the link. Okay. Basically, we are creating a grid for a board. Now we go back to our app.jsx file, and here we need to embed the board component. So we'll just come below our title above our reset button, and we'll do board. And this is how you import board here. And to the board we'll pass some props. First is the Pokemon's array. Second is the flipped cards array. Next match pairs, right? And finally the handle card click function as a callback. So that's our board. Now we need to define this handle card click function because we haven't yet done so. So let's go up here and define it. Right. So now this handle card click, what it will do is it will receive a parameter called ID, right? So now where does this ID come from? We go back to our board. This is getting passed to card. So when it's being passed to the card needs to send it the ID. Or maybe we can do this inside of board. Okay. So we go to the board, on click, we can do a callback, and the handle card click basically gives the current Pokemon's ID like this. Okay. So now our handle card click receives a parameter called ID. Now we need to do something with it. So first we'll check a condition whether the flipped cards array has a length equals to 2 or maybe less than 2, which means to check whether 2 cards have already been selected or flipped by the player. And then we'll also check if the current card is already not present inside the flipped cards. We'll do includes and we'll do ID. Okay, so we are checking if the current card is not already flipped and more than 2 cards have not been flipped. So we'll set the flipped cards array to the current flipped cards array and we'll add the ID that we receive, right? So that's all to this function. Now when we add the ID to the flipped cards, we need to check for a condition whether the cards match or not. So here we'll define a use effect hook, and in the dependency we'll pass the flipped cards array. So whenever flipped cards array is mutated, this effect will run, and it will check first of all if the flipped cards dot length equals to 2. If it is, then it will try to grab two cards, the first card and the second card. And how do we grab that? We'll map over the flipped cards array, right? We check that for each ID whether it exists inside of the Pokemon array. So Pokemon.find, and inside of this we'll get the Pokemon, each Pokemon, and we'll check if Pokemon.id equals to the ID. Okay, so we get the two cards, first card and second card. Now we need to check whether they are the same. So we'll check if first card dot name equals second card dot name. If this is true, then we'll add these cards to the matched pairs. Okay, so we'll set matched pairs to the current matched pairs like this, and then also add the pair matched by the user. So we'll do first card dot name. Okay, like this. Now, irrespective whether the cards match or not, we need to flip them back, and we need to increment the moves. Okay, so we'll create a timeout function, set timeout, which will have a timeout of 1 second, so 1000. Inside of this timeout, first of all, we'll set the flipped cards to an empty array, and then we'll set the moves to moves plus 1 to increment it, right? Like this. The final thing that we need to do is we need to check for the game winning condition, which we'll do again with the use effect hook. And in the dependency array, we listen for the match pairs array. So whenever the match pairs array changes, which means more cards have been matched, we need to check for the game winning condition. So we'll check if the match pairs dot length is equals to the initial Pokemon's dot length. This is the game winning condition. So if this condition is true, we'll set game 1 state to true, which means the puzzle has been solved. So this was the last thing. Now let's do one more thing. We need to show the number of moves on the screen, right? So we'll declare an h3 with the class name of nestText, and then here we'll just say moves and display the moves variable. So here is our board, and we have a moves title and our board, right? And these are our Pokemon cards that are flipped over. Let's click on it. So this shows our Pokemons, and if they are not a match, they are turned back again. Okay, so the reason why they are not matching is because in the match pairs, instead of Pokemon.id, we need to add the Pokemon.name. Okay, so save this, and now when we go back, the cards are matched. So let's reset the game and try it again. So now the cards are getting matched, right? Right. So now, as you can see that the puzzle has been solved in 9 moves, but we need to add some indicator for the win, right? So to do this, let's go back to our app.jsx file. And here, right below the moves, we'll add some confetti that will drop once the game is completed or the puzzle is solved. Okay, so let's check for a condition called, we define the variable called game1, like this. So game1. Now if game1 is true, we show a confetti. Now where does this confetti come from? We'll import it from a package called React Confetti. Okay. Now we need to install this package. So let's go to our terminal and we'll do yarn add react confetti. It gets installed and let's save this. We'll also show a progress bar as the game moves forward. So let's create a progress value variable like this, and the progress value variable will be a function that of match pairs and initial Pokemon. So we'll calculate it by doing match pairs dot length and dividing it by initial Pokemon's dot length and multiplying it by 100. So this will be a percentage. And then for this progress value, we need to show a progress bar. So to show the progress bar, we'll just use the default progress HTML element, and then we'll give it a class from the Nest library called Nest Progress and is pattern, right? Now we will give it some value. The value will be progress value that we define, and the max value will be 100, right? Let's save this. And back in our browser, there is some confetti. Let's reset the game. Now let's try and play the game and see how the progress moves. And as you can see, the progress bar is moving. And the game is won. But the confetti didn't show up. And why is that? Right, so instead of the Pokemons, we need to check for initial Pokemons, right? So initial Pokemons dot length. So now the confetti will show, right? Because the Pokemon's length is twice that of initial Pokemon's, because there are 2 copies each. But in the match pairs, we only are saving 1 copy, so we need to check for the length with the initial Pokemon's array, right? So now our game is working fine. Our game is complete. Hope you like this video, and please subscribe the channel. It motivates me to do better. You can follow me on GitHub, and you can obviously check out aivideo.to. There is a coupon code in the description for 30% off on all plans.